On this episode of ResiWeek, COVID elevates smart home security, locking down that security, and being a brand believer. All this and more on this episode of ResiWeek.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ResiWeek, episode 282, Toilet Paper and Cameras.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Lona, the go-to provider for AV signal distribution and control in corporate, higher education, and residential spaces.
Welcome to this episode of ResiWeek. This is your weekly roundup of all the latest news and stories for the residential AV industry. I'm your host, Matt D. Scott for AVNation.tv. And this week, we are pleased to be joined by two of my good friends. First, we have Mr. Richard Fergosa. He's the principal at Fergosa Design. How's California treating you today, my friend?
Mellow West Coast greetings. We've evaded our heat wave. Everybody up the Pacific Northwest instead, and everybody to the other side in Arizona's got it. So we're chilling right now. I'm digging it.
I like it. Then from the East Coast, from New York City, we have Jen Steinhardt. You might know her as Nerdy Girl online, but she is a service coordinator for electronic environments. How you doing, Jen?
Doing good. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to kick off today with an entertaining story that comes to us from CE Pro. Research is showing that COVID-19 has elevated smart home security use and has increased safety concerns. This comes from some research from Parks Associates, who we all know fairly well. Essentially, a large portion of consumers are investing in their home, working on, obviously, adapting smart home solutions, as well as being a little bit more concerned with security than normal, including specifically 39% of U.S. broadband households who have a vacation or rental property are incredibly concerned about the safety and security of that secondary property, with 95% of them intending to purchase a smart home device in the next year. Rich, let me start with you on this. Is this something that is an actual threat? Is this a perceived threat, or is this just a lack of information? And what I mean by that is, are consumers more concerned about safety and security in their home because they feel that there is a threat, or is it just they're home a lot more, or they're not going to that secondary residence and they don't know what's going on there? Is that all it is?
It's a convergence, and honestly, the biggest reason for it is it got affordable. You can step into any superstore or Target, or you can literally buy toilet paper and surveillance cameras at this point. So what we found, and recently we've been Airbnb-ing a lot ourselves, just because we're social distancing at our newly purchased gold claim. But we did learn a lot about the uses of the technology, because if you do have and again, this is people with multiple residences or rental income, and Airbnb, you have to now consider it as something that people are looking at. I mean, there was the crash because of the pandemic, but as it's coming out, we're seeing that travel is just going completely haywire right now. I mean, it is the floodgates have opened. And so it does make it easier for a couple of things. From a remote location, to inexpensively be able to allow entrance and egress, whether it's somebody who is a housekeeper who's there every other week, or guests or friends, and more importantly, it is the security and the ability of the peace of mind. I would say, in terms of my relationship at home, the surveillance cameras that we have nothing to do with the actual security elements. It has to do with the personal comfort of our family. They like knowing that it's available to them. If I happen not to be home, it's something that they find comfort in at this point. And again, it's become affordable, and that is the key element. 10, 15, 20 years ago, when we were dealing with analog cameras, it was not a small undertaking. Video recorders themselves, storing data was not an easy thing. Now, literally, every person has their surveillance monitor in their hand. And that's really, we've said it so many times, right? Mobile led the way. Mm-hmm. Once mobile allowed the opportunity for people to have a better viewpoint of their home and their personal safety, and again, that peace of mind, once it reached the level where people would go, yeah, a couple $100, to see who came to the door, or if Amazon's there. Again, porch pirates, right? That's the big news. And honestly, what makes me laugh the most, probably what I've seen as one of the biggest motivators, are the little local community chat hubs like Nextdoor. That winds up driving it more than anything else. And and there is, and you again, depending on what part of the country that you're in, there are areas where petty thefts are significantly increasing, and so you can't also turn a blind eye to that, because there is thefts of opportunity, and we found that for a couple $100, you can go ahead and at least provide some measure of deterrence to it. And like I said, I don't think it's really about being able to put surveillance footage and show it to the police and, anything like that. It's an inexpensive way to provide deterrence and peace of mind.
Yeah, very good. Jen, when you see this, what is the way in which you offer this without sounding like a scare tactic? Is there an easy way to pitch this to a client who hasn't asked for it, without, again, sounding like, hey, you got to be careful of those porch pirates?
Right. You definitely don't want to scare anyone into anything, whether it's, surveillance security, or if it's a security feature, like even something looking like at water leaks and things like that. Like, you don't want to scare them into it. But like Rich was talking about, it is about that peace of mind. If you're not going to be there that often, or also a lot of people are alone during this pandemic and things like that, that even if it's a residence that it's not a second location that they're actually in, to know what's going on and things like that, it's all about that peace of mind. I have to agree wholeheartedly that that's the fundamentals of it, is what can we do to be supporting you while you're not there, and keeping an eye on what's going on, in terms of also monitoring their systems as well.
Yeah, very good. All right, moving on to another story that comes to us from CE Pro, and kind of dovetails a little bit into the first one, but is an owner's like absolute worst, as Rich is shaking his head, an owner's worst nightmare. An ADT technician was given a 52-month sentence for a home video hack. This individual was sentenced to 52 months in prison after repeatedly logging into female customers' ADT accounts to view their video feeds. It looks like he accessed over 200 customer accounts over 9,600 times without their consent. Essentially, he was adding his personal email address as someone with access to those cameras, and would either say that it was for testing purposes, or he would just do it without even letting them know, and then obviously accessing them afterwards. They don't get into how he was caught, but this is definitely, one of those things that would keep me up at night as an owner. Jen, when you see this story, and this is, I can't stress how much this stresses me out, knowing that we've got technicians in the field, and they've got background checks, they've got all that stuff, but it's really hard to know what your techs are doing when they're in the field. Is there any way to ensure the safety of your customers from your employees without literally, just watching everything they're doing and checking absolutely everything?
It's a really good question, and it's a really important question. I'll also say from a women's perspective as well, is that from a very young age, we're always taught to look for cameras. I mean, you go into a hotel room and we're looking for cameras. And so this huge, disgusting breach of distrust is something that when you're monitoring systems like this, having policies and procedures and documentation. If you're remoting in, why are you remoting in? What did you do? That if you have this policy in place, it's one thing that you can do to make sure that there's a reason for what you're doing. And most things that you're troubleshooting, you don't need to necessarily see what the camera's seeing either. Like, is it online? Do I need to reboot it? And having a policy for why you are remoting in to visually see what that camera's seeing. I like to think there has to be more, there should be more, but from a technician standpoint and a service standpoint, that's why I'd say so gross.
It's so bad. I saw it and just, oh yeah, it's not cool. And I would argue and maybe add that I can guarantee you this was a massive violation of his ADT employment, contract and all of their service aspects, right? There's no way that this was ever encouraged. Rich, when you see this, there are things that we can do as an industry and as companies to limit the likelihood of this happening. I know in my personal company, we have a pretty hard and fast rule that we don't put cameras inside a home anywhere. They don't go into bedrooms. They don't go into, outside restrooms. They're not inside. If you want a camera inside, you can, go buy a Ring camera or whatever and put it in yourself. We don't touch those because the privacy liability is way too high. What is the common sense approach that maybe isn't as far reaching as mine?
Well, first off, I mean, ADT was a huge company. And so when you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of employees, and, this one employee did it over the course of, 4.5 years. The fact that there was one breach, is just unforgivable, much less, he said 200 breaches, during the course of 4.5 years. That's still 200 too many. But policies were in place. And, it's like they say is once you try to make something idiot-proof, they build a better idiot. And so that's what happened here. And, I think that you always have to consider, and I've had larger companies, and I specifically went back to bespoke and personalized service for a reason because of my client base. And I have, because of my nature of what we do, I have access to a ton of sensitive information. So I'm hypersensitive to this stuff. We always have talks with our clients about this, about, look, here's the point of where I'm comfortable with. I understand what you're asking for. If we're going to go down this route, I'm married to you. I have more information available to me for some of my clients than their spouses do. And that's something that from a business standpoint, depending on your product mix and your market, if your goal is to put in, not necessarily a DIY system, but a do it with me system, and so you're going to be partnering with, the Rings and the Nests and all of those that are out there, the commodity products or Vivint or, whoever ADT renames themselves to be. You're going to have hard and fast policies with the technicians who are allowed to. There should be an auditing process. All of the things that Jen said, those should be in place no matter what. Your first line of defense is what you just said, Matt. Again, we do not do interior. We do not provide any interior services, perimeter only, deterrence, ... However, you do have clients who say, no, this is what I feel, I want to have it for whatever reason. And for all of the systems that we've put in, every one of them has had a different reason. And so what we normally suggests as the first line of defense, which is, okay, first we're going to document this, that you are requesting this. So if nothing else, we're going to go back and say, hey, remember on June 15th, X date, you requested the interior. And also remember that we offered that we're going to put in a physical shunt. So when you do want privacy, there was a physical method for you to deliberately and consciously disconnect yourself from the system. Then, at that point, that thing does not come back on until you physically turn it back on. It's not automated. It doesn't do anything on its own. You make that decision to either engage or disengage. One of the things that Josh AI came up with, with their new micros, people more than ever value their privacy, but they also value their convenience. And so you have to walk a very narrow line between privacy and convenience. And as long as you provide that information of here's the pros, here's the cons, it's not my job it's not my job to make the decision. It's my job to inform you. Mm-hmm. Once I inform you, and then you make the calculated decision based on that, we'll support it. Again, a big part of it, though, and again, where we have to look at it is that as a technology advisor, yes, the answer is yes to a client if they're looking for it. You have to educate them to the consequences. Once you've educated them to the consequences and they say, yeah, I can live with it, I'm okay with that, great. You move ahead. If you have a client who says, no, I'm hesitant, then you go, okay, great. That's what I'm here for, to protect you from yourself. Mm-hmm. And really, that is the difference. And I've always been a believer with, kind of the CDA channel and the education channel and the dealer roundtables and the networking, is that those are the real world use cases. You guys are probably too young to remember, but there was Rob Gerhardt, who was, one of the original CDA members. He taught an entire class on how to screw things up with a client. And it was filled with war stories and horror stories. And kid you not, one of the most valuable classes that attendees could have gone to over the years, because it is an example of here's where it can go wrong in the real world to potentially put you out of business. Mm-hmm. And newer integrators have the luxury of technology, have the luxury of a web search. And there's a false hubris that, inexperience breeds hubris, right? Because you haven't burnt your hand on the stove yet. And so a big part of this process, that we were looking at with this, is that if you've done it enough times and you've screwed up enough times and still managed to stay in business, you should have those fail-safes in place to be able to question yourself and be consistent. That's the key, right? A lot of times you're dealing with it after the fact, and the hardest part is the consistency from the beginning.
That actually reminds me too, just talking about fail-safes, is that whatever software you're using, if you have the ability to send alerts when a resource is added, that's another fail-safe that you can do. If someone, like a technician, adds themselves after the fact, so you've set them up or something like that.
Yeah. Taking advantage of the software that's out there is huge.
And know that there will always be Idiot 2.0 out there. So, always. And you might hire them. So.
Hey, thanks for watching the first segment of this week's episode. To catch the entire show, please click the link below or visit AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv.